And because you did the storyboards, did you get to go and do any other part of the production stuff?
Well, here's the thing about the Turtles episode. So like I said, I just went in there for a job and they asked me to do it as a sketch, as a spec piece, basically, as a sample. And I was resistant because I already had a career. So I felt like, why should I have to do that? So I did the boards. I did about 4 pages of boards or 5 pages and drew them out a few times on Bristol paper, then transferred them over with my Lightbox to the proper, because they gave me pages that had the proper guides for the storyboards, had the logo on it and had different placings for text. So I refined them, I redrew them, and I had them all set. And then I also had my original boards in case they wanted to see my work, because sometimes people want to know that you actually drew the stuff. And I brought it back. I think I drew it in 3 days. I think I drew the 5 pages, 4 or 5 pages in about 3 days. And that was another thing. Like I didn't know the deal with the script. I didn't know if this was just like a script that they kept around, because in comic books they do that. They'll have scripts that they keep just to get people to try out on, and they're not part of the regular production. So I didn't know what the deal with the script was, and I figured, let me get these in as fast as possible so they could see how fast I can work and how good I can work. So when I came back to the office, I had the artwork. And remember, I never had a proper interview. I wasn't asked to come up. I just kind of walked my way in the first meeting. So now here I am on the second meeting. I bring the boards in and I get to reception again. And I said, I'm here to see whatever his name was. I forgot his name. And I have these boards. And she goes, okay, yeah, just leave them here. And I said, like, where? She goes, right on the desk. And I'm looking on the desk and there's a pile of mail and there's some papers. It's a mess. And I'm thinking, if I put my illustrations up in my storyboards, like no one's gonna have a sense of what they are. Like my name's on them, but like whatever. So then I was thinking, should I leave my portfolio case because it's so big and obnoxious? Maybe that will be like a visual cue that, oh, we should pay attention to that. And then I thought, no, if it's in the case, maybe they will think it's for shipping or something. So ultimately, I left the boards with my name and all my information on them. And the woman at reception assured me, like, we'll send them to whoever, I think his name, like, maybe with a J or something. But we'll send it to him, he'll get it, whatever. So I waited patiently. I think I called like the next day or whatever, and I got some kind of like, yeah, we're gonna send the work to him and you'll hear something. And I didn't hear anything. I didn't hear anything back. And I decided, well, let me not be that guy who's so obsessively calling or whatever. So I waited like 5 weeks. And then finally I said, hey, I tell the whole story. I brought my work in, I did the boards. I never heard anything back. And the woman's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, what do you mean? I left my boards for this episode. Who are you working for? And I was like, well, it was a sample. Well, we don't do samples. I was like, what do you mean you don't do samples? I did samples. So eventually I went to the office and I told this whole story. I was like, hey, I came up, I got a script and some boards. I drew them. I left them here like a month and a half ago. Whatever happened? And there was a woman who was there the first time and she was there the second time. And she was like, yeah, I remember you coming in, but I don't remember you leaving anything. And I was like, I didn't leave it the first time. I drew it, I brought it, I left it. What's going on? And she's like, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what these boards are. I said, no, you have to know. I drew them. What do you mean? And she's like, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff going on. I don't know. And I tried to reach the guy I had spoken to previously, and he wasn't available. And so I just stood there like, okay, nobody here remembers that I did this. And I have the copies. Like, nobody remembers I did this. What do I actually do here? And I said, you know what? This was a tryout. And they probably hired somebody else. So whatever, I'll take the boards that I did, I'll put them on my portfolio. At least I'll add this to things I've done. And that's what I thought about. I was like, call it a loss and kind of like move on. And then about a year later, and again, I didn't really watch the 2000s edition of the Turtles. I'm just clicking channels one Saturday morning, and sure enough, the Turtles are on. I was like, oh, this is a new series. Okay, yeah. This is probably what I drew that sample for. That's cool. Hey, and I see the train. I see the train with the hole in the side of it. And I was like, this cannot possibly be the episode. I've never seen this show. How could this be the one episode? So I'm just watching it like, I wonder how they did it. Since they didn't accept my boards, I wonder what their sequence of events would be. And I watch it, and it's exactly what I drew. Like, it's shot for shot what I drew. And, you know, there's only a few ways to look at the moon and imagine what the face of the moon is. You know, all of our minds think similarly. But I gotta say, those storyboard scripts were so wide open that I'm looking at this like, no, they used my boards for this, because this is exactly what I drew. So yeah, that episode, um, I storyboarded that sequence on the train. Never got any kind of notification. I assume that it was piled on the desk and somebody must have just went, oh, the boards are in, great, and then sent it off to whatever country they had it animated in. But yeah, I never got any notice, recognition, or pay for it.
Oh, well, I really did enjoy that scene, and one of my favourite fights. And how did you get into doing like artwork?
Oh, that's pretty easy. I've been drawing since I was like a toddler. My family has little stick figures I drew when I was like 2 years old. And drawing is just, I'm blessed, I'm fortunate that when I look at a thing, I can visualize it after I see it. And then I can draw based on the visualization that's in my head. So I've been drawing since I was a kid. And by the time I was like 11, I got introduced to comic books, American comic books, and I was already drawing characters. And I just wanted to draw the characters as good as they were in comics. I didn't have an idea of a vocation. Eventually, I became a avid, typical fanboy comic collector, hanging out in a comic shop. And an older gentleman came into the comic shop one day with a trench coat and a fedora, like something out of a bad detective comic. He had this big black case, a flat black case. I had never seen anything like it. And he was there, he opens it up. All of these huge, huge pieces of artwork in comic book form. And that was the day that I learned that people drew comics. I was about 12. I learned that people actually draw them. I learned that they draw them bigger than the final size. And I learned that sometimes the artists go out and try to sell them to make some money. And so that's what he was doing. He was a comic artist from Marvel. I asked him 10,000 questions. And I walked away thinking, so I could do this for a job. I think I want to. And that's where the inspiration came.
And because you worked in comic books, and what have you done like in the comic book industry?
Oh, so like I said, I worked on a lot of comic books for Milestone Media and for DC Comics. Milestone was a historic company in that there were 4 men who got together and made Milestone Media. Dennis Cowan, Derek Dingle, Dwayne McDuffie, and Michael Davis. And what was interesting and different to the typical comic book owner group was that these were all African-American men. And their ambition was to make a more realistic, more inclusive world. And so the characters were not simply Anglo-Saxon males with perfect hair flying over the city. There were women, there were Pakistani characters, there were Latino characters, Caribbean characters, Asian characters, African-American characters. And the city was diverse and the characters were diverse and the company was diverse. And so it's a long story. Let me try to make it short. I went to a Comic-Con with some friends to try to get a job because that was our ambition. Along the way, we got roundly rejected by everyone we saw and basically told that we were not qualified to do the job that we were hoping to get. And that same day, 2 things happened that were key to my whole life. I kept running into people from the college I was going to, the art college, who had snubbed their noses at comic books. And every time I ran into one of them, like, well, what are you doing in the Comic-Con? And they would sheepishly say, oh, I'm an intern at this company. So I learned what an intern was that day. And then my friends and I, so dejected, we left and came back. And when we came back to the con, there was a guy standing in front of the Jacob Javits Center, which is a convention center in New York City, where the Comic-Con's held. I recognized this guy from an article I'd seen about Milestone Media. And I just made a beeline straight to him and just started blathering on like, "Oh my God, you're so and so." And eventually he was like, "Okay, what do you want?" And I said, "I want your job." And he said, "You what? You want what?" And I said, "Oh, no. I mean, I want to do what you do. I want to make comics. I'm an illustrator." Once I stopped rambling, he said, "Go inside, go to our table." I said, "You have a table?" He said, "Yeah, go to our table and talk to Matt," who is Matt Wayne, who at the time was an assistant editor at Milestone. He's now a very accomplished animation writer out in California. He's worked on tons of projects on Disney, on Justice League, Ben 10, Marvel projects, Netflix projects. He said, "Yeah, go inside and see Matt. Tell him what I sent you." And after showing my work to Matt, I was convinced that this was the moment. I was now going to be a professional comic book artist. And Matt said, "Yeah, you're not that good." I was like, "Oh, okay, that again." And he goes, "But we have an opening, like, if you want to be an intern." And I'm like, "Intern, right? I just learned what that is." "Yes," I say yes to that. So that's what happened. I got the internship, and every night I made work, and every morning I harassed them to try to hire me for something. And they were like, "Yeah, that's not good. That's not good. Fix that, change that." But after 6 months of just working, just like really honing my ability and getting better, I got just good enough to be an assistant. And I was an assistant for about 3 months before they assigned me my first book. So I was painting. At Milestone, the books that we had, this is like when digital color was coming in. So Milestone didn't do digital, they did painted, like original watercolor artwork. And I'm a very good painter. Like, actually, here's a show off. Like, this is me painting.
Wow,
Thanks.
that's really good.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm all right. So yeah, I was a pretty good painter, and Milestone painted their comics, and that got me in. And eventually I went from being an intern to an assistant to a painter on Icon, Hardware, Static, and Shadow Cabinet sometimes, which were all the books of Milestone. And then I became an editor of the painting process, and I supervised and trained other painters and worked on a lot of things. And then eventually Milestone just kind of folded up, and we had a partnership with DC Comics. Went over to DC Comics, and I worked on Impulse as a regular colorist. I worked on a lot of special projects, Flash, Donna Troy, Wonder Woman. I think I did a Justice League special edition, did a Christmas book once, all as a colorist. And then in recent years, I've worked on a lot of nonprofit comic book projects, like a book called Mine, which is an American comic about stories of women's health and women's various issues in life, and all the proceeds went to Planned Parenthood in the US. I worked on a book called APB, which was, I worked on a book called, another nonprofit book I worked on was called APB, which was from Rosarium Press. And that book was focused on the issue of police brutality in America. So I did a story on there. And I'm sorry, I keep getting a call in. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I worked on this book, which is called APB, which is a story about, it's an anthology, a collection of stories about America's crisis with police brutality and systematic racism. And I illustrated and drew a story in there. Actually, I illustrated and drew stories in both. And I'm currently working on a comic of my own, which has been a slow burn, but it's coming. Oh, and I'm working on a friend's project, which is called Sheriff Wright. And Sheriff Wright is set in the 1800s in the American West. And it's about a woman who is a sheriff and also is African-American, which is in a very provocative place to be in the 1800s. So I'm still doing a lot of comic work on my own from time to time.